Good evening, everyone. I am Reverend Sherry L. Jackson, based in Alexandria, Louisiana. This is the 31st lesson of understanding the Old Testament, particularly the first five books of the Bible. This is the study on the book of Numbers, which is the fourth book of the Old Testament for Christians, the fourth book of the Torah for Jews, and also known as the fourth book of the Pentateuch. So tonight we are going to review a little bit what we last week we did an introduction to the book of Numbers, and so tonight will be a little bit review and then a little bit of moving forward. As always, just want to remind you that it is impossible to talk about all that are within these books, but we can give you the big concepts that will help you to understand the book itself, how to going in that the book of Exodus will deal with the physical deliverance of the Hebrews out of Egypt. You will remember that anytime you hear about the book of Leviticus, whether it's somebody talking about it, preaching about it, or teaching from it, that the central theme in the book of Leviticus is a manual of how to worship God, where God created a sacrificial system by which Israel, an unholy people, would be able to come to a holy God. So tonight, as we talk about the book of Numbers, Numbers picks up where Exodus kind of like leaves off. Um, Leviticus is between Exodus and uh, Numbers, and it's not really a whole lot of narrative or dialogue or conversation in the book of Leviticus. It is a lot of instructions, and so the narrative picks up again in the book of Numbers, and Numbers takes its name from basically the counting of the people, the census of the people. How many people are available, not only how many people in general, but how many people are available to fight as an army? Because remember, as they prepare to go into the promised land is not empty. There are people there. There will be enemies there. They are coming in and declaring stake in a land that's already occupied. So therefore, they will have to fight. So when you understand the first chapter of Numbers, the first few verses 1 through 3, if you're at Numbers, God instructs Moses to have the people to count. Want to know, number one, not just how many people, but how many fighting men do you have? How many people ages 20 and above who are able to fight? So that's going to be important to take a census, uh, uh, go to everybody's, to all the different tribes, the individual households, to find out how many people are available to fight. So as you see this map here, just kind of like taking a snapshot or review to see where we have come from. They have come, of course, from Egypt, moving on down, and they are still around the base of Sinai, where they have they are getting further instructions, and they are going to continue on to move. And where you see this green number 3 is where they're going to get stuck. where they're going to be wandering aimlessly over and over and over for almost 40 years. And so after the census was taken, they really should have been ready to, they were not far. They really should have been ready to go into the land. But as we remember, they got stuck in the wilderness. So just reviewing again, Numbers 1:1-3. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting in the second year after they had come up out of Egypt, saying, take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male head by head. So remember that they are about 2 years after being physically delivered from Egypt. They are 2 years out since they left Egypt, and they are now getting the instructions for Moses to give the instructions to count all of the people. At this point, I'm going to ask Pastor Green to chime in as we are at this introduction right now. Pastor Green, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't know what's all of that.
Okay, now I need you to go away from the room where you are with the
That'll work. Am I better?
You're better.
Okay, thank God for being better. What I want to make sure that I share with us is that in the scheme of things, what God is working through Moses, and just give me a moment to summarize, if you will. He said to Moses about sending spies to spy the land of Canaan. And sure enough, he called out the 12. He organized the spies. He sent them into Canaan. This is key that we remember this. God had promised to give them the land, but they had to go and occupy. As you said earlier, people were living in the land. And so the spies went. They went to the land. They saw it. They came back, and they reported on what they saw. How fertile the land was. It was a good land, a land flowing with milk and honey. They even brought back clusters of the grapes that they saw. They were so big, they put them on poles, and multiple men had to carry the grapes. It was an awesome land. But when the report came, 10 of the people out of the 12 said to the crowd, the people are too big. It is a good land. It's a fertile land. And their perspective of themselves, they said, we see ourselves as grasshoppers. So here we have a grasshopper mentality that they doubted God, they doubted themselves, they doubted their ability, and 10 of the 12 prevailed in convincing the whole tribe of Israel that we can't do it. Caleb and Joshua, we call a minority report, said to Moses and to the people, we can do this. Since God is with us, we can conquer this land. So 40 days, a 40-day journey, because they refused to trust God and refused to follow Moses' leadership, their punishment would be a year for a day. Now, the census is vital because we had a little over 630,000 people at the time that they were afraid. The people that were counted, men that were 20 years and older who could go to war, who could be combat, who could be soldiers, 20 years and above. And because they were afraid, because they failed to trust God, God said, those 20 years and older would not enter the land of promise. So here's the numbers. After 40 years, 2 generations, after 40 years, they took another census, and it was still over 600,000 male men over 20 ready to fight. So this is the key I want to point out if I can. 600,000 plus men died in the wilderness because 10 people, 10, just 10 people convinced them that they could not accomplish God's mission. 10 people convinced Israel that they could not accomplish the purpose that God had given them, and it caused 600,000 men to die. And sometimes I wonder, those of us who are in leadership positions, the influence we have on people in their lives and their well-being and welfare. I wonder if we ever stop to count the cost of how many people will suffer because of the report we make, whether good or bad. And so the book of Numbers is all about taking a census, who can fight today, and then recount after 40 years, all of these folk have died. Well, really 38 years and months, beyond, 38 years and months, not quite 40. And when you think of that many people dying in the wilderness because 10 folk convinced them they could not accomplish their purpose. I mean, you got to be careful who you follow. So that's the picture we have here. And that's the picture I want to make sure that we see in looking at that. Okay?
Thank you so much for taking us, giving us a good overview, but now we're going to back up a little bit to catch up with some of that. But I do appreciate you giving us an overview. Let's just back up a little bit to catch up to all that you've said. So if you can see what's on the screen now, those numbers that he's talking about, remember in Numbers, it's about a census. It's 2 censuses were taken. There were 2 counting of the people. And the first census, as he said, ended up being 600,000 people. Now, again, whether these are exact numbers, roundabout numbers, estimated numbers, it's still a lot of people. The 2 censuses, the first one is going to be taken in chapters 1 through 4, and the second census is going to take place further on in the book. Now, what is important? Who are these 2 sets of people? The first census is the first generation. This is the generation that came out of Egypt. This is the first generation of the Exodus community. This is the generation that has been with Moses from the beginning. Remember, it's only been 2 years since they've gone out. Okay, 2 years. The second census focuses on the experiences of the second generation. Now, remember, Pastor Green told us that some spies were sent out. They came back, with the report that we can't take this land. And so because of the lack of trust, the disobedience, this first generation died out. And so Moses, after the years are up, are wondering, he takes a second census. And so that's the second generation. And then there's going to be a telling of the law again. There's going to be not all the same, but the concepts are going to be the same of giving the law again, so that the second generation will understand. So the first generation is of the redeemed, that they were prepared for triumph, but they ended up in disaster. The first generation, just think about it. They had gone through, they had seen Pharaoh's army, the Red Sea. They had seen the miracles from the quail, the manna, the bitter water turned sweet. They had seen all of this. Yet when they got ready to get to all, they could almost just touch the land, the promise, then it seemed that fear crept up and they forgot all that God had done for them. And they took the report of the 10, which suggests that the majority is not always right. And so they lost out. They lost out because of the report that they listened to rather than listening to the two, Joshua and Caleb. So the second generation has an opportunity for greatness, and they have the opportunity also, they have the benefit of learning from the failures of their parents and the need for absolute faithfulness to the Lord despite all the obstacles. So they benefited because Moses is going to tell them all that had happened. And so they will have the experience of hearing what happened to their parents, so they will not make the same mistake. So again, if we look here, we talked about it a little bit last, we will talk about it more, that the tribes were put around the tabernacle or the tent of the meeting. As you can see, the tent of the meeting is in the middle, where the Levites were going to be responsible for. The camps were lined around, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So the censuses, who Moses and Aaron listed with the help of the chiefs of the Israel, 12 men, each represented his father's house. So all those listed of the people of Israel by their father's house from 20 years old and upward, every man able to go to war in Israel, all those listed were about 603,550. So again, they did not count everybody. They wanted to know who were the fighting men. Who were the men that were 20 years old and older and who had the strength to go to war? So again, these are just the people who could go to fight. These are the people who could go to fight because they were going to, even though the promise, the land was there, they still had to go and possess it. And I was talking to one of my patients today on the psych ward, and I use this exact illustration that, although there are some things that we want and there are some promises that have been given to us, and I use the example of losing weight. It doesn't matter how much I buy the size 8, 10 and hang it up. If I don't fight for it, if I don't go and possess it, I will never get there. So there are obstacles that's going to be in the way, but if we are willing to fight for it, the promise is right on the other side. So the purpose of counting the adult males 20 years and older was to identify those who were serving battle when Israel entered the land. Now, again, interest in the land should have been only a few weeks from taking the census. Moses had taken another census 9 months before, back in Exodus, but and that time he counted everybody. But this time, the census in Numbers 1 excluded the Levites because they were not included in the military. The Levites were not going to be among the fighting men. They had a specific purpose. So, again, the total population could have been nearly 2.2 million, but the fighting men was only 603,550. So this is the promise that God had given Abraham way back in Genesis. The Lord kept his promise to Abraham about raising a nation to provide the promised Savior. So again, who would have thought back when God gave the promise to Abraham, who was basically impotent, his wife was barren, 75 years old, who would have thought? But going through years and years and years and years, hundreds of years have passed, and yet this is the promise being fulfilled. This is the promise being fulfilled. Pastor Green, did you want to get in there? Okay, maybe not.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, we got you now.
Okay. Keep in mind what you just said earlier. When God first called Abraham, he said to him, all the nations of the world will be blessed through you. And so therein is the first promise. The next promise he told him, that your descendants will sojourn for 400 years in a strange land, and then we will return. So first promise, Sarah get Isaac, the family start. Isaac gets twins. Jacob show up. Jacob's boys are named for the 12 tribes of Israel, even though his grandson named show up Ephraim and show up in Manasseh. These were Joseph's boys, but then they ended up in Egypt because of the famine. Joseph saved the family from 70 plus people went to Egypt. After 400 years, Moses bring out over 2 million, nearly 3 million when you count women and children. He brings them all on the promises of God to Abraham, the promises of God to his people. But then they got cold feet when that majority report said, we look like grasshoppers. We can't do it. We're not strong enough. We're not smart enough. We're not big enough. We just cannot do it. Many of congregations have failed God because the so-called leadership did not have the vision of God or connect with God or trust God enough to put God's plan into purpose. You said it's all right. 600,000 plus men between 20 years old and whatever the fighting age would be died in the wilderness and never reached their potential, never reached the promised land, never maximized what they could have been had they trust God. And so the census taken, the second one, is to say, hey, these are the fighting men and these are the people that we could go with. Now they will die out, and to show you how this is what blows my mind. In the wilderness, no prenatal care units, no St. Jude, no intensive care, no real OBGYN practices, no hospitals. Can you imagine that many babies, boy babies being born? Just boys. I'm not counting the girls, but that many boys being born in the wilderness with little to no sanitary condition and no hospitals as we know it. And so the picture I could get in my mind is that God, through his divine power and providence, protected these mothers, the fathers, and the babies. I mean, he protected them all just by sure the will of God. They had nothing out there No car, no Kmart, no Walmart, no Rite Aid, no Walgreens, nothing but God. No central heat, no central air, no telephone, no email, no fax. None of the stuff that we depend on every day to survive with. No brick houses, no running water. Could you imagine that many babies being born in a wilderness? No manufacturing place that baby clothes and bassinets and all the stuff we have to have for babies. And then God brought them. And yet, out of all the ones who said, Caleb and Joshua were two people who say, yes, we can. And those were the two strong men that God is going to walk with him to prevail through all the plagues in the book of Numbers, all the serpent biting people in the book of Numbers, all the poisonous snakes biting when people rebel. And so many died violent deaths because they failed to trust the leadership God put in place. I pray, God, that we never be guilty of that. When God put leadership in place, we consult God to make sure it's consistent with his word, his will, and his way. And I promise you, if we do it that way, God will bless us every time. And so I'm glad when the roll is called, I'll be included in the count. And the count that's going to make it through and to that promised land.
Okay, thank you so much for that. As always, I did not mention it earlier, but if you have a question, certainly do so. Question or comment, you may ask it, or you can send it through chat, and I'll try to keep up to see that if I have a question over there or not. Okay, so when we were talking about everybody was counted except the Levites. So what about except the Levites? So what about the Levites? The Levites were not counted. For the Lord spoke to Moses, should be saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not list, and you shall not take a census of them among the people of Israel, but appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, and over all its furnishings, and over all that belong to it. So remember, the Levites were not going to be a part of the military organization because they were not assigned to war. Their task was only for the tabernacle. Their military assignment, if anything, was to take care of the tabernacle, to be in charge of setting it up and putting it down every time they moved. That's what they were in. That was their assignment. So, in other words, if you think of the military, people enlisting go for different assignments, whether it is communication, whether it is health, whether it is actually fighting, being on the front line, logistics, transportation. And then there are some who just go to fight. The Levites were not a part of the fighting men. They were in charge according to Numbers 1. Let's look at that, Numbers 1:49 through 53, that clearly outlines how the tabernacle was going to be protected. Let's just start at 49. Only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor shall you take their census among the sons of Israel, but you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, and over all its furnishing and cover, and over all that belongs to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishing, and they shall take care of it. They shall also camp around the tabernacle. So when the tabernacle is set out, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle encamps, the Levites shall set it up. But the layman who comes near shall be put to death. The sons of Israel shall camp, each man by his own camp, and each man by his own standard, according to their armies. But the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the testimony, so that there will be no wrath on the congregation of the sons of Israel. So the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle of the testimony. Thus the sons of Israel did according to all which the Lord had commanded Moses, so they did. So again, the Levites were in charge of putting up the tabernacle, or taking up the tabernacle when they got ready to move, and putting it down whenever they stopped. So remember, this was a movable tabernacle. If God was going to be with them, they had to take the tabernacle with them, and only the Levites were responsible for that. It was like they were to protect the tabernacle so that no harm could come to it. And also remember, a couple of weeks ago we talked about Aaron had some sons who offered up what could be considered an illegal sacrifice to God, or illegal fire, and they were killed for that. And so it says that here also, that anybody, the layman, those who were not supposed to deal with the tabernacle, would be punished. Remember, I told you, we've been talking about that there is a difference between those whose function, the clergy per se, it is to take care of the what we would, well, take care of the priestly functions, which was basically the tabernacle, and those who were laymen. And that is the same thing today, that it is not that the Levites were in it more special than the others, is that they had a different function. Now, I know today that clergy has gotten all out of whack about what their real responsibilities are, and put themselves on a pedestal, and in some instances it has gotten way to the left. But there is no high and low. It's all about the function. It's all about the function. So what about the Levites? They were appointed over the tabernacle, and so there was no need to see how many people that they had, because they were not going to be put to war. Their numbers and duties are also recorded in chapter 3 and 4, which we're going to deal with next week. The Lord sets the Levites apart for special service. Their duty is spiritual, not military. God charges the Levites with moving, maintaining, and protecting the tabernacle. Their duties were just as important as those who went out to fight. Each party was needed. Again, we have different gifts, different functions, but they all for the same purpose. So we saw the word, you may have in verse 52, you saw the word standard. It says it's going to each man by his own standard according to their armies. Where a standard was a banner to identify a large group. So just think about in a parade, there are two people usually in front, depending on how big the banner is, or it says that behind this banner comes Grambling State Marching Band, Southern Marching Band, whoever this group is. And so that's what the standard was, to say that the which camp was coming through. So there were 4 major banners, because remember there were 12 tribes, and each tribe has an individual banner. So there were 4 major big banners were divided into Judah, Reuben, Ephraim, and Dan. And behind each one of them were individual tribes assigned to that particular group. So, and each one of them had a symbol. I don't know if you can see this or see the paper that you have. There were 4 banners. There was Judah, Dan, Ephraim, and Reuben. Those who marched behind Judah's standard or banner, which is symbolized by the lion, is Issachar, Judah, and Zebulun. Behind Reuben was Simeon, Reuben, and Gad. Behind Ephraim was Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh. And behind Dan was Naphtali, Dan, and Asher. So again, there were 4 major banners, and there were 3 tribes that came behind each banner. Each tribe came, 3 tribes came behind one banner, and that was a camp. So you got the camp of Judah, the camp of Reuben, the camp of Ephraim, and the camp of Dan. And so having this organized this way, each of the 12 tribes had a specific area of the camp to live in, and the tribes were divinely situated around the tabernacle. 4 of the tribes, Judah, Reuben, Ephraim, and Dan, were recognized as leaders, and each had its own standard or banner identifying it as the head, while the other tribes had lesser banners. So again, Judah is symbolized by the lion, and we hear that all the time, even the song, The Lion of Judah. We have Reuben, Ephraim, the oxen, Dan, the eagle. 4 divisions. Just think about it. If you've been in the military, there are divisions, and then they come down to the smaller and smaller groups. So again, this is also a way, you got lots of people now, so this is also a way to organize these this big group of people. You got 2.2 million people, right? And so dividing them up strategically around the tabernacle was a way also to better organize them. And again, now you won't be able to see it much here, but on the paper that I sent, you should be able to see it. Of your paper that you have, is that each one of the tribes had a symbol. Each one of them had a symbol. And again, you see the line of Judah, and we keep talking about that one because we believe that this is the tribe that Jesus would ultimately come out of. So just going back, well, looking here, the nations were organized according to the tribes we talked about for several reasons. It was an effective way for them to move, to be governed. It made dividing the land once they got to the land, because remember, they are not far from the land, and so all of this had to be in order before they got there, so everybody will know where they were going when they got there. Of course, it didn't go off right away, because they ended up wandering for 40 years. But so when they got there, then they would divide the land accordingly. It was a part of their culture also and heritage, because people did not have last names, so you were known by your your big family name, your clan, or your tribe. So people say, okay, well, what tribe did you come from? Oh, I came from the tribe or the camp of Reuben. Well, then what tribe of the camp of Reuben did you come from, Gad or Simeon? Okay. It made it easier, and it made travel more efficient. Again, we got 2.2 million people out. And so there was bound to be confusion if it wasn't some type of order. If it wasn't some type of order. Pastor Green, did you want to get in right there before we move on?
Yeah, for those of us who spent time in the military,
Yes.
know that there were many units, but each one had what was known as a guide arm, guide arm, or company banner, which showed the company's mascot, and it made it plain and easy for everybody to know in combat who was on your right and who is on your left. Therefore, one would not be killed by friendly force or friendly fire, as we call it nowadays, to know where everyone is located, who's responsible for what, and it works better. I might want to point out, if you don't mind, in the naming of the tribes of Israel, you notice the Levites did not have land, and Joseph's name is not mentioned. But Joseph's two boys, Ephraim and Manasseh, are the two tribes that cover Joseph's portion as well as the Levites' portion. So instead of the Levites having property or part of the inheritance, you will see Manasseh with part, and you will see Ephraim with part. You may notice that Ephraim had a double portion, a birthright portion, because he had property on both sides of the Jordan. And so in naming it and looking at the name, don't think for a moment that is not covered in the text. Because sometimes we say, well, the Bible contradicts itself. No, you got to remember that when Jacob blessed Joseph in Egypt, and Jacob was dying in Egypt, he had Joseph's two boys to come in, and he blessed Joseph's boys and gave them the inheritance that would have been Joseph's. And so maybe when you see the name Ephraim, you know, that was not Jacob's boy, and Manasseh was not Jacob's boy. Those are Jacob's grandchildren. And just for the good of whatever it is, to know that we know they were grandchildren, and we know that they got an inheritance, would help us maybe in our journey of study. And that's kind of where I am with that. I want to make sure that we don't lose anybody, and that nobody walk away from the table saying, I did not see Joseph with any property. Well, you won't, because this boy's got it. That's kind of all I wanted to say with that, because looking at the diagram and how God had told Moses to lay them out and how to protect the tent, the tabernacle, I want to make sure we all see the same picture. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing it out to us. And if you want to recall Jacob giving those blessings out, that was in Genesis 49. If you go back to Genesis 49, you will you can refresh your memory on that. But also remember, as we talked about, also the tribe of Levi was going to be in the middle, and he had the tribe of Levi also had three individual groups with them: the Merarites, the Gerasites, and the Kohites. These three were going to have specific functions. And we'll talk about that a lot more next week when we deal with the duties of the priest. the duties of the priest. And I hope that you are seeing or making the connection from when we started more than 30 weeks ago, dealing with Abraham. All of this is coming to fruition. All of this is connected. So again, whenever you hear these terms, you don't have to be afraid or wonder what is going on. You are able to connect. And I think a lot of times we don't read the Bible or things pertaining to scripture because we cannot make the connection. And when you can make the connections, I think, at least for me, it makes it it makes it extremely better for me. So if we look at the ordering of the people, of the tribes, it's important to understand who's where. You got sons of Leah on the east side, you got sons of Rachel on the south side, and then you got one of Jacob's maiden's child, Gad, who's also on the south side. You got sons of Rachel on the west side, and sons of Bela were last. They were on the north side. So this is just a picture to show how the tribes were situated based on their mothers. So let's jump to Numbers 3:11 through 13. We're going to talk a little bit more, just a little bit, to introduce the duties of the priest. Numbers 3:11 through 13. And it says, again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, now, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the sons of Israel, instead of every firstborn, the first issue of the womb among the sons of Israel. So all the Levites shall be mine, for all the firstborn are mine. On the day that I struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified to myself all the firstborn in Israel, from man to beast. They shall be mine. I am the Lord. So he is calling the tribe of Levite basically as the firstborn that he's going to take to himself. Remember, way back when God said dedicate all of the firstborn to him. Well, in this instance, he is considering the Levites to be the firstborn for him, and they are going to have, again, specific instructions that we're going to deal with specifically on next week. So again, the Levites family, we see the Levites, Levi as being the head, and he has the three, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And they, of course, they're going to be divided up, as the descendants go on. But Levi is going to be the high priest, and then you got the priest, and then everybody else. But this is the Levitical family, and this goes back to Exodus 16 through 27. So the Levites, again, what were their roles? The Levites were chosen by God to assist the priest. So we got the priest, we have the priest, which was Aaron, and then those who come under him would have been called the Levites. They were the one who would have been doing the hands-on of taking up the tent, bring the tent down, that kind of stuff. So the high priest, remember, the priests were responsible for the sacrifices, and then the Levites, the actual Levites, were going to be responsible for doing the hands-on work, the daily work. So each Levitical clan performs assigned duties for the care and security of the sanctuary and its contents. Just as the Lord consecrated the Levites to care for the tabernacle and support the services in the sanctuary, Yahweh God likewise calls and consecrates his people to support the ministry of the word and sacrament today. And that sacrament would be the ordinances, what we consider the ordinances of baptism and the Lord's Supper. So again, just wanted to show you this this layout of the of how they were assigned. They were put in 4 groups of 3 tribes on each on the 4 sides. The Levites were on all sides, but they were closer to the tabernacle. So as you can see, there are the Levites around the tabernacle on all sides, but there still was a buffer between the people and the tabernacle, and that was the Levites. Again, Yahweh was at the center of their lives, not only their religious life or personal life, but also their national life. If you go back to the Egyptians, they too would put the tent of the king, his generals and officers at the center of a large army camp. And therefore, the Israelites placed God to signify their king at the center to dwell among his people. And from him comes the power to save and to defend. So again, it was not an uncommon thing where a king would have been in the middle and everybody else around him. And therefore, it is the same way with God, Yahweh, who is in the middle. And he is protected by the Levites. He is protected by the Levites. Pastor Green, did you want to add something before we open up for questions or bring it to a close?
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm good with that. Thank you for taking the time to point out where Jacob's children were situated and how they were situated. And interesting when you look at the number of Benjamin and Joseph's children who followed behind the tabernacle and all of the tribes, is that Benjamin and Ephraim, they brought up the rear. Those are Rachel's children.
That's right.
And if you remember Jacob, when he was going to meet his brother Esau, back after been up to Uncle Laban's for 20 years, and at Jabar, he had Leah's children to go up front, the cattle and all, and he had Rachel's children to follow behind. It's funny how things change and how they remain the same. But God protected all of them. And the joy that I have in looking at this numbers play out is to know that when God appoints leadership, when God gives us a purpose or a mission, God will protect his purpose and plan if we just be obedient to follow. I mean, he will protect his people. And now those who weren't faithful, they're gone. And he's raised up this new generation to go into the promised land, and he's going to fight for them. And as we study these numbers, one of the pictures I hope we walk away with in the book of Numbers is when the leaders actually rebelled so bad they wanted to take on Moses and Aaron. That a serpent, God allowed poisonous snakes to be in the camp. And those poisonous snakes were actually killing people by the thousands. And he said to them, to Moses, make a snake of bronze, put it on a pole, and if the people, when they're bitten, just look up and live. And those who fail to look and live will die, but those who look and live will be saved. That's a powerful thing that takes place. Very powerful.